A military coup has occurred in Bolivia, forcing its president, Evo Morales, to step down. Now, he is urging individuals to resist this military coup, but there had been violence that he felt the need to stop, and he felt the only way to stop it was to step down. Now, there is reason to believe that this military coup has the United States written all over it, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But first, let me just note that Morales was Bolivia's first indigenous president. He was reelected last month for his 4th term, and you had organization get involved and argue that there was fraud in this election, even though there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever to indicate that there was any type of rigging or any type of fraud. The Organization of American States, also known as OAS, made this claim, and it's important to note that this is mostly funded by the United States. Now, before I get into more details about what occurred in Bolivia, I do want to go to this next video. Mark Weisbrot is from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and he gives you some sense of what the OAS is and what type of US interests played a role in this military coup. Take a look.
Well, this is a military coup. There's no doubt about it now after the head of the military told the president and vice president to resign, and then they did. And I think it's really terrible the way it's been presented, because from the beginning you had that OAS press release the day after the election, which hinted or implied actually very strongly that there was something wrong with the vote count, and they never presented any evidence at all. They didn't present it in that release, they didn't present it in their next release, they didn't present it in their preliminary report, and there's really nothing in this latest so-called preliminary audit that shows that there was any fraud in this election, but it was repeated over and over again in all the media, and so it became kind of true. And you know, if you look at the media, you don't see anybody, you don't see any experts, for example, saying that there was something wrong with the vote count. It's really just that OAS observation mission, which was under a lot of pressure, of course, from Senator Rubio and the Trump administration to do this, because they've wanted for some time to get rid of this government.
So Evo Morales was well liked by Nicolas Maduro, by Lula da Silva from Brazil. He was part of the Pink Tide movement in Latin American countries, where leftists really took over with an economic populist message. And Morales was able to lift nearly 20% of Bolivians out of poverty.
They hate that.
And they hate that. That is the reason why you have people like Donald Trump and Marco Rubio targeting Latin American leaders like Evo Morales. Now, I want to note, Morales wasn't perfect, okay? So I don't want this to be a one-sided story. This was a military coup, I disagree with it. It was, again, it has the United States written all over it, and it's wrong. But one of the things that some liberals in America keep latching onto is what happened with term limits in Bolivia. Now, back in 2009, there were term limits. You could only get reelected one more time. You can serve 2 terms. But Evo Morales actually worked with the Constitutional Court to do away with that term limit. And so he got reelected for the 4th time, and that's when you have the OAS get involved and essentially do this military coup to push him out. Now, I'm gonna give you more details in just a minute, but Cenk, do you wanna jump in?
Yeah, so 2 things about that. Look, I'm not a big fan of that either, but now let's give you context. First of all, so their Constitutional Court is our Supreme Court. So there was a guy named Powell who wound up becoming Justice Powell, who wrote a memo saying for the Chamber of Commerce, when he was a lawyer for them, saying we should take over the Supreme Court and other institutions in America. So Nixon eventually saw that memo, said, well, I like this guy letting big corporations take over the Supreme Court, and he literally put Powell on the Supreme Court. And so he packed the court with his favorites, and eventually the court said, yes, corporations can give unlimited money to politicians, which allowed corporations to buy all of our government. So you're telling me, oh, Latin America is corrupt. Well, our Republicans stacked the court so that corporations can buy our entire government wholesale. But it's not just that. How about term limits? Well, New York has a term limit on mayors, but when Bloomberg didn't like it, He's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna run for a third term. What are you gonna do about it? But nobody ever called him a dictator. And in fact, the mainstream media kisses his ass day in and day out, including today, right? Like, oh, Bloomberg, oh, maybe he should be president. Maybe he should be president. Oh, he's got a real chance here, right? But when Evo Morales does the same exact thing, dictatorial, tyrannical, right? So then be honest and be objective. Are they both tyrannical? And will you call Mike Bloomberg tyrannical from here on out? If not, what are your standards? Okay, the New York Times story on this was an embarrassment.
It was 100%. 100%. But luckily there are independent media sources that have done good reporting on this, and Democracy Now! Happens to be one of them. And so I want to go to one more clip from Democracy Now! Again, this is Mark Weisbrot. He's from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and he gives more detail into the OAS and how it's funded.
In terms of the Trump administration, you can look at tweets and statements from Marco Rubio, right before the votes were even counted, saying that there was going to be fraud and making it clear that they didn't want this government to be there. And so, yeah, I think that, it's very obvious that they supported this coup, and it's very obvious that they pressured the OAS. Where the United States supplies 60% of the budget, and this is the problem. The media treats this OAS as though it's really an independent arbiter here, and they do have electoral missions, and most of the time they're clean, but they are not always. And in Haiti in 2011, for example, they reversed the results of a first-round presidential election without any statistical test, recount, or any reason. It was completely political.
So he's right. This is mostly funded by the United States. You have Donald Trump, which he attempted a coup in Venezuela earlier, which we've talked about on this show. And now it appears that there was a successful military coup in another country where you have a leftist leader that they do not like. And keep in mind, Evo Morales made sure to the profits from oil in Bolivia, he made sure that it went back to his people, or the commodities, any profits from the commodities went back to the people. And that is exactly what people like Marco Rubio and Donald Trump absolutely despise. Now, there have been some good politicians in America who have spoken out against this. And one of those politicians is Bernie Sanders. He said via Twitter, "I'm very concerned about what appears to be a coup in Bolivia, where the military, after weeks of political unrest, intervened to remove President Evo Morales. The United States must call for an end to violence and support Bolivia's democratic institutions." Morales was democratically elected. Unless there is actual evidence to indicate otherwise, this is unacceptable. This was a military coup. And look, it is, I guess, consistent with how Republicans feel about election meddling, because they allowed Russia to meddle in our elections. Why not go off and meddle in other countries' elections as well?
So Weisbrot made another great point. He said, look, when there was this slight irregularity where the vote counting was paused for a while in the middle of the election. And so Morales needs 10 points to avoid a runoff. But when they stopped the vote counting, he already had a big lead. And the rest of the counties were more indigenous areas where he does great. So the trend after they started counting the vote again was the same as the one before they started counting. And the OAS has no evidence and has shown no evidence of actual voting irregularity. Now, I'd like to note that here in America, in the year 2000, we stopped vote counting. And it turns out Al Gore would have won the state of Florida and should have been president. But our corrupt Supreme Court said, no, I don't care what the votes are. I'm gonna stop the vote counting. You wanna talk about a voting irregularity? And I'm going to just declare Bush the president. So that is way more corrupt. Okay, now do I like that they stopped the vote in the middle? No. Does that give me pause? Yes. So it reminds me of Erdogan, who said in one particular vote, a cat walked into an electric socket or something and knocked out the electricity in 9 different cities. Okay, so I treat that with great skepticism. But here, in the case of Venezuela, there actually were voting irregularities, okay? And I'm very concerned about the elections in Venezuela. But here, you have no evidence of voting irregularities.
No evidence, and Morales offered to do the election again, right?
Yes.
He offered that, but it's not about the election. It's not about supposed irregularities. It's about pushing him out, and that's exactly what they got.
And guys, in Venezuela, they said voting irregularities. Here, they say the same thing, even though they have no evidence of that. Then they said in Venezuela, well, look, he destroyed the economy and everybody's suffering. But Evo Morales lifted the economy up, and he lifted a ton of people, a huge percentage of the country out of poverty. So they don't have that excuse, but it doesn't matter. They go to the same playbook anyway, because it's like, it reminds me of the Big Lebowski. We want the oil anyway, Lebowski, right? And so in this case, it's natural gas more than anything else. But the reason I say the New York Times did an embarrassing piece here is because Weisbrot gives you, for example, context and is fair about it. It says OAS most of the time is honest, but it has these issues. Did you notice what he said about Rubio? That he tweeted about voting irregularities before they happened, before the so-called irregularities happened. Okay, that is at the bare minimum something you should look into, verify, and if that's really true, makes you go, I wonder what Rubio knew about the so-called irregularities that were gonna happen. I'm not saying definitively that Rubio's in part of some plan or something, but if you're a real reporter, you'd look at that. If you're a real reporter, you would note that the military demanded that he step down. And Morales is calling it a coup, and so is his vice president, and so are so many different people who resigned from his government. You would give that context. Now they do note that Morales called it a coup, and so did his vice president. But they don't explain when the military says you must step down. That is by definition a coup. Instead, a lot of the mainstream, almost all of the mainstream media, is reporting, well, hey, look, irregularities and Morales is a bad guy. And if you're thinking, wow, I can't believe New York Times is doing that. When we did all the other coups in the 1960s, 70s, and all in that era, one of the first things the CIA, they would do two things. You go read any history on this, okay? Number one, they would do fake agitations in the streets. They would rile up people, and then they would start paying off cops and military and say, oh my God, it's untenable, somebody has to do something about this. And the second thing they would do is they would go to our press, New York Times included. Time magazine was notorious for this back in the day. And they would say, now write that he's a bad guy, he's a communist, and if we don't do something about it, it's gonna endanger America. Full well knowing it isn't true. And a lot of the mainstream media played along with that. So now I think they're better today, but this was not a shining example of it.
And one final thing that I do have to mention, again, Morales was the country's first indigenous president. Prior to him, the country was ruled by a small group of elite who were descendants of European countries. Now, there is a component of this that is clearly racist, and Glenn Greenwald tweeted a video, which why don't we bring that video up now, and I'm gonna read Glenn's tweet as we watch it. Bolivian police cutting the indigenous flag, which had been Bolivia's second official flag, off their uniforms. This coup is literally the opposite of restoring democracy, which is how it's being depicted in Western press. It's violent, racist, imperial, Christian fanaticism. It's disgusting.
Yeah. Now, why do you cut the indigenous flag off if this isn't about race and this is about so-called voting irregularities? Or does that look a little organized to you from forces who never wanted the Bolivian people lifted up, who just wanted more profit from the natural resources of Bolivia? This is a story as old as time, as old as America and the Americas, and how we have unfortunately oppressed so much of these two continents, North America and South America. And if you want to cry about that because you're a Republican, oh my God, you're telling people the truth and that doesn't play well for America, how can you guys do that? Well, that's a sad day for you. We do the news here. So if you want a pretty little story about how America's always the golden hero and rides in on a white horse and saves the day, go to Fox News, go to get your propaganda somewhere else, or sometimes go to the New York Times. But we don't do that here, we give you the full context. And by the way, it doesn't mean that every leftist government is wonderful. We told you several instances of things that concern us. Because if you're a real progressive, you want democracy no matter who's in charge. But this coup had nothing to do with a democracy. It was the exact opposite. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.